Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conversations in Horror, the podcast. My name is Kevin Powers. I am the festival director and program director for Something Wicked Film Festival and Events, and welcome to our podcast. Now, we have been doing several episodes over the last month or so in honor of the amazing Roger Corman, and we are going to continue with that today as we delve into one of the films that he produced called Death Race 2000. And to start this conversation with me today is Thomas Tinarello, who is one of the people who kind of had me want to do these films or these conversations on some of Roger Corman's films. Roger Corman, by the way, if you're not familiar with him, I know there's a lot of people who are not. Had a profound effect on the film industry, not just horror genre, but every genre. He produced movies in every genre known to mankind, jumping from fad to fad, producing way more movies than probably anyone else, and directing movies as well. Unfortunately, he passed away recently, and we wanted to honor that legacy by having conversations based on some of his films. So if you are just getting with our podcast now, please check out some of the other episodes that we've done on some of his other movies, and we are glad that you're here to listen to us talk about that. So thank you, Thomas, for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Kevin. It's a lovely day here at the Stations in Horror Speedway, and we got so many racers coming down the track.
That is a good way to start this off because this is essentially a precursor to Fast and Furious films, which I believe Corman also produced the original of that too, didn't he?
Well, yeah, I think the original Fast and the Furious was made in it was a drag racing movie
Yeah.
produced in the late 50s, but Corman's first movie was a Western in 1955. I'm not 100% positive that one was one of his. But yeah, this movie definitely. I'm not to look that up because I didn't even think about that. Well, I wasn't even thinking about. I was thinking about all kinds of modern parallels to this movie, and we'll get into it. But like Fast and Furious was not one of them.
I know. I'm surprised that didn't come up.
But yeah, like this kind of I don't know if it was you or me, but I think it's important for us to do this movie because it's probably one of Corman's most famous movies that he did as a producer and famous movies that is an original script. I mean, it's not an original. I mean, it's an adaptation of a short story, and we'll get into that. But it wasn't chasing a particular trend, I don't think. And it wasn't a ripoff of anything in particular. It was its own thing. And it kind of created so many imitators. And I mean, heck, the next year, the director basically did the modern day PG rated comedy version of this with David Carradine and called it Cannonball. And it was like the first Cannonball Run movie. So if you don't know what that is, ladies and gentlemen, Google that sucker.
Yes, and by the way, everyone, Corman did help produce the original Fast and Furious movie. I had to look that up because I even forgot about that. I just knew that there was an original version, but I don't think I've ever seen the original version of that either.
Me neither. I don't think anybody has.
So I have to ask because my experience with this movie is very different than maybe yours. Because you suggested we do this film as part of our tribute to Roger Corman. So tell me a little bit about your experience watching this film and enjoying this film.
Well, the first time I saw it, it had to have been on Netflix years ago when Netflix was young and still delivered. I don't remember like where I was in my life or anything when I saw it. I just remember thinking, oh, cool, this movie I've been looking for eons and heard about and seen clips of, I can finally now watch in its entirety. Isn't streaming amazing? And that's what I thought. But like years and years ago, I know this movie by reputation. And I remember generally very much seeing the poster for it in a video store somewhere and being intrigued by this idea of a race that I thought that you had to kill each other to kill the fellow racers in order to win the race. And I think I even had a video game on our PC computer that was kind of like that. So that idea always intrigued me. And and then I also found out about it through I found out what the plot was and everything through this gigantic phone book sized book, which I wish I had a prop up to show you. But it was called Video Hound Golden Movie Retriever. And for those of you out there, folks who are old enough, probably 40, you guys remember the Video Hound Golden Movie Retriever book, which had tiny, like thumbnail postage, sometimes postage stamp size movie reviews in their 10,000 pages with a nice little index in the back and like an awards index. This was like IMDb in paper form. It really was. And there was a time in my life, actually, I think my Aunt Sharon, who's a film editor over in Hollywood. Hi, Aunt Sharon, if you're listening. She gave me my first Video Hound book because before IMDb, that's how you found out, hey, what movie did so-and-so do? And, you know, nice say 1960s. Bam. If it was on video in any form at all, Video Hound had it.
Mm-hmm.
And it rated movies on a 1 to 4 bone instead of 1 to 4 stars. So I can't remember what this rating for Death Race was. I think it was a 2.5 actually. 2.5 bones out of 4 bones. But anyway, it might have been 2. I don't know. It rated a lot of movies 2 bones now that I think about it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they were kind of harsh over Video Hound. But Video Hound like sometimes would mention also if it had a sequel or something. And so I read about it there, and it said that there was a Death Race 3000. Turns out that's not entirely true, and we'll talk about that later. So that's where I found out about it, and that's how I originally saw it. And then when I finally did see it, I thought, it was good. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a wild ride. It's certainly no Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, but it's loads better than that Jason Statham remake that they did not too long ago.
So now that you bring up the Jason Statham remake, I actually really enjoyed that movie only because I'm entertained by Paul W.S. Anderson's movies, and that was one of the ones that he directed was the remake of this, which is almost resembles nothing of this original movie. But I liked that movie enough when I saw it, and let's first tell everyone out there, I've only ever seen the remake once when they originally came out. It's not like I've seen it more than once and I go watching it. But that movie did prompt me to go find the original movie, Death Race 2000, which I had never seen. I had seen Death Race, but never seen Death Race 2000. So I came to this one much, much, much later. I did not care for this movie when I first watched it because to be honest with you, after rewatching the film, I really didn't get it the first time I saw it. I just saw this low, and don't knock it because I watched probably a really crappy version of it when I originally watched it, and the movie did nothing for me. Absolutely nothing. I didn't remember it after seeing it. When I rewatched it, I said, "Oh crap." It was like, dude, I was watching the movie for the very first time again. When I originally watched Death Race 2000, after watching Death Race, it did not leave me with any type of impression. And I can guarantee you I did not get it until I just rewatched it. Because now, like I was telling you before we started our conversation, I actually think it's a really damn good movie, especially in the way that the story unfolds. I think it's really, really good. So that's why I'm excited to talk about it, which is very rare for me on this show, where I watch a movie again and reevaluate it and really enjoy it the second time around. This film I had no impression of, and then I rewatched it because Thomas told me to, and now I really, really enjoy it. So,
thank you, Thomas. Right, that's right. Thank you, Kevin. That's why you listen to Uncle Thomas. Well, and another thing that some of the fans out there might be asking, some of our listeners might be asking, the pertinent question that we'll just address and move on, which is, this is Conversations in Horror, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a horror movie. That's what they would say. Mm-hmm. But to be honest, I would say, well, you're right, Mr. Hypothetical listener out there, or Mrs. Hypothetical, or whatever you are. But honestly, I think there is a case to be made that this movie is a kind of horror, and I would call that the subgenre. I would call it social horror,
Mm.
which is to say that I would put this in the same. And I'm not saying like social horror in the sense of the kind of stuff Jordan Peele does. Nope, pun intended. Uh, I would argue, Kevin, that the term social horror, as applied to movies like Get Out and and Us, is actually a misnomer. All horror movies really deal with social and political issues in one way or another, no matter what. I mean, Night of the Living Dead is a big example, of course, but this movie in particular is super political.
Super political.
Oh yeah, and what I would say that social horror really is something that actually Vincent Price said when he was being interviewed when I was doing research for Mask of the Red Death. He said something interesting where he said somebody asked him if his movies scare him, and he said no, no. He says in fact, I don't think that the pictures I do are horror films. I call them thrillers because they give you a thrill. Movies like The Man with the Golden Arm, those are movies that are horror movies to me. Those scare me. Because that movie, if you don't know, guys and girls out there, that was like the first. Frank Sinatra did this movie called The Man with the Golden Arm, and that movie is like one of the first Hollywood movies ever to deal seriously with heroin addiction. So that movie was really hardcore back in the day. So I would say by today's standards, social horror would be things like Chernobyl,
Mm-hmm.
Requiem for a Dream, or if it's a dystopian type thing, which is what this is, then I would put it in the same category as, say, the Purge movies.
Yeah, I agree.
Where the horror, quote unquote, is coming from this idea of let's explore a social issue and then take it to its inevitable horrific conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
And look at the depravity of this future society. Let's look how deep hell really goes and what might be lurking around the corner. And where this movie kind of is adapted from is I thought actually it was a completely different short story, but knowing these two different short stories together gives you an idea of the genre that this movie comes from. William F. Burroughs kind of did this sort of thing for a while too, this sort of dystopian horror type thing. But I thought that this movie was kind of, and during the Video Hound days, I thought it was basically an adaptation of this short story that I read about in Asimov's science fiction magazine called Coming Attraction. Coming Attraction was a story by Fritz Leiber. They published it back in 1950, and it was about a post-nuclear New York, Manhattan. It was like uninhabited and filled with the dregs of society. And some British guy was just walking down the street, and the streets are just overrun with gangs that run around in cars that have fish hooks on the side of them. And they're hoping that the fish hooks would snag the ladies off the sidewalks and drag them with their cars by their skirts. And it turned out to not be that story, but the actual story adapted from was a story called The Racer by another pulp science fiction author called Ebe Melchior. I'm not sure I can pronounce his very Dutch name properly, but it was a very short story about this world, this not really post-apocalyptic, but definitely dystopian reality in which the national sport is the death race, a cross-country race where the drivers go, and yes, they could kill the fellow racers in order to be the first to cross the finish line, but you also have to be the one with the most points, and you get points by slaughtering pedestrians on the highway with your car, and different people get different point scales. And that's in the short story, but in the short story, it's just one driver, and he kills somebody on the highway, gets points for him, and stops his car, and gets out of the car, and basically has a moment of conscience as he starts looking at this dead body. And that's pretty much the story. Roger Corman took that and said, well, that's not going to be very exciting, and just kind of took the world and the milieu of it, and maybe like the hint of that scene a little bit in a scene later on, with one of the fans of Frankenstein, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. But basically, Corman does what Corman does with short stories and pretty much anything he adapts, which is he'll take the idea of it, the germ of it, and make his own tree.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what he does with this. But as social horror, I would also say that, before we move on, that a big component, I think, of social horror, especially this kind of social horror, is the theme of the gamification of slaughter. And we saw that earlier in the 2000 Maniacs show. We had the gamification of slaughter. And like I said, the Purge movies have built an entire franchise around the gamification of human slaughter, which I think comes to us from the Colosseum, comes to us from, like, Kumite, martial arts tournaments to the death, all these, the myth, but also historical reality of a depraved society that's so depraved that they would have sports in which the stakes are literally life and death.
Yeah, so when you're talking about this, because this is a great point. One of the reasons why I love this movie now is the fact that this is something that we've seen in a lot of other films, and it makes me enjoy this movie more. Something like The Running Man, and you said The Purge, and it's one of those concepts where in the future we have to cull the masses by giving them this game that rewards people for death, for killing people. And The Purge, Running Man, all these movies have that element in it, which I can't believe I missed when I originally saw this damn movie when I was younger. Because I love The Running Man, and I actually really enjoy the Purge movies a lot. And of course, 2000 Maniacs. When we talked about that, you brought that up, and I said, "God damn it, yeah, you're right. I didn't think about that until you mentioned it."
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and I think this sort of thing's going to be with us probably till the end of time, or at least until let's hope this doesn't happen, but at least until our society gets to the point where we actually do have death races again and gladiatorial combat.
Well, I mean, even the remake Death Race had this same concept in it, and I forgot about the movie Gamer. Has the same concept in it. So we see this a lot, surprisingly, now that I think about it. But Corman is so early.
Oh yeah, he was always a trailblazer when he wasn't chasing a trend. Yeah, but he would be. There were times where he would be so forward thinking, and this is one of those. And I think a lot of that has to do with that he let that. I mean, obviously he did co-write the script, but also I think he let Paul Bartel, the director of this movie, really lean into the satire.
Yes,
because Corman realized very early on that if you did this movie seriously, it would be super grim. And nobody would watch it, and he wouldn't make a dime off of it, and he was right. So that's what set this movie apart from, even the remake, which I felt like
it lacks satire.
It lacks the satire, but I wouldn't say it lacks all satire. What it did was, this is the only thing I remember from the Jason Statham friggin' Death Race, is that it satires itself in a weird way. It satires action movies by gamifying it to the point of absurdity. Because I don't know if the only thing I remember from that freaking movie is how they turned the racetrack, basically, and the way you score points. They basically turned it into a giant video game, but it's real. It's like they have power-ups. They have like all these things that you would get in a video game, and somehow they exist in reality. And it's just like, what's the point? In this movie, the point is the idea of, again, the gamification of slaughter, the celebrity-ification of murderers and political figures who present themselves like gods. You have Mr. President, and that's all he is Mr. President. He has no name. Uh, and he presents himself as this god who rules from afar. Like literally, he's overseas, but when you see him giving his pre-game speech, it's like he's shown in this like divine iconography where he's like this godlike figure stepping down from a long staircase that descends up into the red sky.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's before we move on though and get deep into the beginning of this movie, which I would argue the first 15 minutes, not even 20 minutes, the first 15 minutes of this movie are a masterclass in world building and character development and stake setting. It does all of those things very quickly and honestly, and we'll tell you why. I believe this movie, at least the first 15 minutes, should be shown in film school classes as an example of this is how you do that without very much exposition, or this is how you do exposition in a way that's interesting.
So you mentioned the beginning, and I want to say this before I forget, because I made note of it. Because I don't know if any other movie has ever done this. I'm sure there is, but Roger Corman may have been the first to do it. But the film opens with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yes.
To the flag. And I'm like, holy shit, dude, that's a brilliant opening for a film that's having I'm gonna use your word now because I love using your word, gamification. Of everyone in the United States glorifying this game, which they've been doing for the last 20 years, because this is the 20th anniversary, which also marks the president with no terms who's been in office for 20 years because he started the game to begin with. These are all things I noticed when I rewatched it. I was like, holy shit. I didn't notice any of this watching it originally. I just it just went over my head. But the opening with that Pledge of Allegiance, and it's almost like a propaganda opening for an opening movie. Like it's telling the audience, you are safe here watching us present a game about violence against innocent people that we are all rooting for. Like I was like, holy shit, dude, this was a great beginning. It sets up the entire world, and you immediately, like you said, go to each of the drivers. And I was like, wow, how the hell did I not see this when I first saw this movie? I'm like, dude, this is a great opening for this movie.
Oh yeah, like Corman and Paul Bartel use the format of and they're not completely into it. It almost has a found footage type quality to it in the beginning because they're showing you everything from almost exclusively, not entirely, but almost exclusively from the point of view of the media coverage of the sporting event.
Yes,
it's now the very first frames are not exactly the arena. There is this wonderful little opening title card thing with these quasi animated shots of the cars and the title that comes zooming at you, shiny in chrome, before it goes to this close up of a trumpet and the national anthem. Those, by the way, apparently were done without Roger Corman's consent, because Paul Bartel said they needed a good title card. And Corman was like, no, that's not in the budget. So basically, he put up his own money and got together with an animator friend of his, and they did the title cards themselves without Corman knowing. So this is probably one of the few times where somebody pulled one over on Roger Corman, and they were right. But they go to what's brilliant is like they use this structure, this kind of not CNN, this kind of ESPN structure of introducing the world and introducing all the drivers and introducing them in a way that's quick and concise and shows us everyone's thing, because everybody has a thing, but they also build up piecemeal in a very short period of time your main character, Frankenstein, played by David Carradine, who by the way was fresh off of finishing Kung Fu. Apparently, like 2 weeks ago, before he started making this movie, he walked off the set of Kung Fu, and he picked this movie because he needed something that was as far away from his character on Kung Fu as he could possibly get, and he really wanted this movie to be a hit, and he really wanted this movie to start immediately, because if he didn't do something right after Kung Fu, he said, I knew my career was dead. But thankfully, because back in those days, back in the day, you have to remember, ladies and gentlemen, in the 60s and 70s, there were two kinds of actors. There were movie actors and there were TV actors. And generally speaking, they did not cross over.
No.
That sort of thing didn't happen on the regular until the era of George Clooney. When George Clooney transitioned from ER to From Dusk Till Dawn, that opened the floodgates. Now nobody bats an eye. But back then, that was a big deal for a TV actor to transition to movies. Even if it was a low-budget exploitation movie like this. It was still something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Paul Bartel and them just kind of get together, and what they do is the first thing you see is oh, by the way, I think it's funny that I don't know why I didn't notice this before, but like in the crowd, before you see any of the drivers, you see there's a guy with a Nazi flag in the crowd. He's kind of awkwardly fumbling it, like, why am I waving in that? Why am I a white guy waving a Nazi flag? What's going on here? I think he's probably hoping he wasn't going to get beat up or something. Because they shot this in very liberal Los Angeles, so yeah. But like, you get the fans and you get the announcers. You got sportscaster Junior Bruce, who's supposed to be kind of like a twisted parody of Howard Cosell, and his dad, who was the low-key version of Howard Cosell. By the way, for you youngins out there, Howard Cosell was a sportscaster guy who was very big into the boxing world, and he's who John Voight played in Ali. So with Will Smith, that's who Howard Cosell was. If you still don't understand, Google him.
Yeah,
but we keep going back to our other sportscasters. Like there's another one called
what's her name?
The girl, yeah. Oh, Pander.
Pander.
Yes, who has massive Effie Trinket vibes. I'm almost positive that that's who Effie Trinket was kind of sort of based on in the Hunger Game books. Is this character who is like giant blonde hair and says that everyone she interviews is a dear, dear friend of mine. And we go to see her point of view of the camera, and then outside the camera, looking at her with this futuristic looking camera. By the way, though, this movie takes place in 25 years into the future from the 70s when this was done. And we do see some nice little matte paintings of the future Los Angeles with some future looking spirey, freaking buildings and a subway that goes between skyscrapers, because for some reason everybody thought subway trains would go in tubes between skyscrapers in the future. We still don't have those, but okay. But like, she is like, we're going to see Frankenstein, who was the lead, who's the champion of the death. And he's mysterious because he wears a mask. He's mysterious because they call him Frankenstein because he's had all his parts changed because he's been in so many crashes that he's had all his arm, his legs, his eyeball, everything has been replaced and stitched together by Swiss doctors. He has to go overseas, just come back from overseas from his latest surgery, but he's in this gurney and he's in full costume under the gurney. And he appears to have a messed up left eye, apparently.
And
also, this is where you get your director's cameo, Paul Bartel as his doctor, saying, "No more pictures, no more pictures." That's Paul Bartel.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah, and but what's funny is you don't see Frankenstein all at once. At first, you just see his feet walking, and then you may see his back, the back of his head, with this kind of wild, iconic looking, almost S&M costume that he's got going on. It's just black faux leather because David Carradine refused to wear real leather. I guess it's vinyl or something. Pleather, I don't know. if they
Oh
had
my
leather
God.
back in the 70s. But yeah, when you finally do see his eyes, it's like it's his. The only thing I could think of to as an equivalent, he kind of looks like the Gimp from Pulp Fiction. To be honest, he really
Okay.
he really does. It's just a black leather hood. It's not real leather, and just three holes: two for his eyes, one for his mouth, and a plastic looking mask over the mask,
Yeah.
which is really. But anyway, and that's what he is, and he's got like his teeth bared all the time, and he's kind of stalks around a little bit, like almost a lumbering
Yeah.
Frankenstein monster a little bit, and that's your guy. This is your hero. This is who you're supposed to root for. And you're like, what? This is our guy? Really? Not handsome Nero the hero, played by freaking Marty Cove, by the way, the sensei who shows no mercy on Cobra Kai. Love
Yeah,
that guy.
I didn't realize that until I rewatched. I was like, "Holy shit! I didn't know he was in this movie." Actually forgotten that Mary Warrenoff was in this too. I was like, "What the hell? This movie has a lot of stars I don't forgot about."
Oh yeah, Mary Warnoff, who some of you might not know, is kind of a scream queen. She did well. Actually, going back to Paul Bartel. She was kind of very famous for being the cannibal wife in Eating Raoul, which is what Paul Bartel would later go on to do as his big kind of cult classic. So they played those same characters though in an extended cameo in the original Chopping Mall.
I love
And
it.
yeah. Uh, so yeah, and like so Frankenstein's our hero, not Nero the hero, and not Sylvester Stallone.
Not Sylvester.
That's right. Sylvester Stallone is in this movie, and he's not the hero. In fact, he's a big fat jerk. He plays a guy like all. Oh, by the way, like everybody's introduced in their cars except for Frankenstein. Except for Frankenstein, and all the cars come up to the track and wave to the crowd and say some words to the press or say some trash talk to the other racers. And freaking Sylvester Stallone's car, all of the cars, except for the Nazi chick's car, Matilda the Hun, and 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 Stallone's car, they're all based on animals. They're all like different animals, except like even Frankenstein's car is based like on like a dragon,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got teeth coming out the fender. There's spikes coming out of Nero's car. It looks like a tiger, I think. And of course, Calamity Jane, Mary Warrenoff's car, is a giant bull with bull horns on it that she uses to impale people, and she does to great effect the Matador guy.
I know. I love that scene now.
I know, right? But Mary Warrenoff kind of went on to be like this sort of scream queen who was like a very tall, tough kind of lady who's the sort of person I think who would probably like fit into like the kink culture, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But she's very believable and very endearing in this movie. And weirdly enough, she could not drive. She had not learned. I don't think she ever learned how to drive a car. So every time you see her quote unquote driving in this movie, that's a stunt person.
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. I think she was the only one of the cast who could not drive. But so Stallone's car is basically like he's supposed to be. His motif, his thing, is he's like a vain kind of 1920s gangster.
Yep.
He's got literal Thompson submachine guns mounted on his on his headlights. They don't ever actually fire any bullets from those Thompsons, so I guess they're just decoration. But the thing he kills people with is this giant knife in the middle of the car that comes out the hood, which made me think, weird kind of Rambo looking knife there. Interesting. But anyway, I think his name is like Machine Gun Joe. And
yeah, Machine Gun Joe.
Yeah, Machine Gun Joe is just so pissed off that everybody loves Frankenstein. And they only care about Frankenstein and they don't care about him. So he's trying so that's his thing as a character, is he's trying to do something better than Frankenstein. That's all he cares about. And of course, Nero is very vain. Calamity Jane has terrible luck, but she, is basically nice to her fellow drivers, except for Matilda, who's a total Nazi.
Oh,
And that's who the flag was for. That's who the Nazi flag was.
yeah.
Because she has. I love her. Every driver. By the way, every driver has a navigator of the opposite sex who
Hmm.
helps them navigate cross country. And I love Matilda's navigator's name is like Herman the German. I think it's hilarious. I don't know why.
Uh,
And I also love the trash talk that they exchange. Matilda says to Calamity Jane in an almost like Schwarzenegger sort of way, "Whoever called your car the bull was only half right." Very clever.
yep, yep, yep.
But like they have but then you get to Frankenstein when he's finally getting into his car and he's out of the eye of the press. But the function the press serves though is that the press is there to give the audience information.
Hmm.
And because they have these rapid fire questions, and because they also have Miss Pander asking other questions, and sometimes getting answered, sometimes not. Every question and every answer is important. Every single thing is set up and pays off later.
Yeah.
But I mean, just a couple of quick examples here. We get a little more when he's talking to the press. He's talking about like we find out that the president is going to fly in from Singapore, wherever the heck he's usually at, and he's going to crown the winner of the race.
Hmm.
That's going to be important later. We find out that one of Frankenstein mentions, or one of the reporters asks about the fact that one of his latest upgrades is he's got a cyborg arm. That's super important later. We find out that he's been paired up with a navigator whom he's never met before. And according to, I think, Pander, she's a, quote, real sex pot. All of that is important and pays off later. And then, bam, the pacing goes, and we are away. And he meets her, and her name is Annie. And immediately there's distrust between them. Because he doesn't know her, and you figure you get the impression that she's hiding something, and she is. So all of this has been set up. I timed it. It is 14 and a half, almost 15 minutes. And by the time they are racing off and get to the first kill, actually no, they've started their engines and they go, and I think it's Stallone's car who gets the first kill, which gives you your kind of first little bit of entertainment value, because on the way to this first kill, you do see the cars streaming down the highway, bumping into each other, some great road footage, chase footage, and then Stallone kills somebody. And it's, oh gosh, this poor guy. It's a construction worker who's 38 years old. We know this because the TV tells us. And Stallone like rams him in the crotch with his giant knife at like 50 miles an hour. And it's very fake blood, but it's all over. And all of this is in 15 minutes, the first 15 minutes of the movie. Screenwriters out there, if you can fit all that kind of stuff in your first 15 pages, I guarantee you somebody will want to read your script. It's amazing.
Well, the other thing is, you make a point. They do a really good job setting up the beginning of the race, having them race against each other, bump into each other, and then of course when they splinter off into their own directions before meeting up at the central location. I do love the way that they end up killing or not killing certain people, because Machine Gun Joe does everything that's expected and what the audience expects of him, whereas Frankenstein turns the tables constantly throughout the entire movie.
Oh yeah, that's a good point, Kevin. I didn't think about that, and that could be like a kind of underlying theme that I didn't even think about, is the idea of how do you succeed in life in a weird way. Because it reminds me of something that Stallone himself said in an interview I saw years ago. I think this is right when he was doing that stupid racing movie that he did called Driven. Somebody asked him, "Why did you do Driven?" And he said something to the effect of, "Well, I think there's that there's two sports that are really a metaphor for life. And yes, I am going to do this impression more than once. Uh, he said wrestling and racing are the two sports that in his opinion, most encapsulate human existence. And I think that's part of Joe's problem, is that he keeps doing what's expected of him. He keeps trying to do it so well, but he's really just doing what everybody else is doing. He's not creative enough to do something really world changing like Frankenstein is trying to do.
Yeah, so I noticed this only on this second viewing, like when they all line up the suicidal old people. And of course, he avoids them and kills all the doctors and people. I'm like, dude, this is hilarious. This is so great on commentary. The fact that all these people are either they're volunteering the old people or that they are sacrificing the old people. And Frankenstein is like, I'm not going to play by your rules. And he kills all the doctors and nurses and everything. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. But that's not the first time he does it either. Like he kills, he kills the one person who's part of the racing organization, and they don't know if they should give him points for killing that guy or if it's even legal. I was like, is it legal to kill one person who's associated with the racing organization? We weren't expecting that. I was like, oh my God, this movie was so freaking hilarious with its commentary and the way that it threw away expectations.
Oh yeah, and also we should probably lay it down for people because the movie lays it down pretty much right after that first kill. What the point system actually is, because it's kind of funny. And
yes.
Sick. It says, and as the Howard Cosell clone sits down and gives us the lowdown, he says, women are 10 points. Teens, 40 points. Toddlers, babies under 5, are 70 points. Old people over 75, 100 points.
So, and they made a very big deal of the fact that Frankenstein misses out on all these points by not killing the old people, but killing the younger nurses and doctors. And I'm like rolling because Frankenstein had, and that's a good foreshadowing that Frankenstein has his own ulterior motives that no one knows because he's not playing by the rules.
Oh no! And also, we should probably make this clear as well, ladies and gentlemen out there listening, is that while I did mention the first kill is bloody, and there are other ones later on that are very, very fast and very bloody and gory, which is, I think, enough to barely qualify this as horror. And like I said, social horror, because yuck, yikes sometimes. Oh boy. Although I begin to wonder what they left on the cutting room floor, because I think it probably wasn't more. Oh yeah.
I guarantee you there's more.
Just so they could get an R rating. The when Frankenstein kills those nurses, there are some those kills and some others that happen later have a kind of Looney Tunes quality to them. They're cartoonish and not really very bloody at all. Like literally, he goes behind this, he goes up on the sidewalk behind some planters. And you don't even see his dragon car. You just see the bodies of these limp bodies of the nurses and doctors going, boom, boom.
Yes, I loved it. I was like, oh my God, this shit is so fucking hilarious. I was like,
it reminds me of this stand-up comic routine I saw years ago. I don't even know what the context was, but I remember it's so funny that he was like, he was describing like drunk drivers coming home for Christmas, and he was like, they get in their car and it's like up on the sidewalk. Thought that was so wrong. That's the kind of humor we're dealing with in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Despite the serious subject matter, they play it really. They play it really. They play it to the hilt in terms of the satire and the comedy, and they do a really good job of balancing it because it is gory, and the comment that you're watching essentially is sanctioned murder during a freaking racing event that everyone watches.
Yeah. And now that I think about it, like the the exaggerativeness of the violence is for satirical effect. That's kind of the same sort of thing that Paul Verhoeven was doing in the original RoboCop.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
So again, right in this case, Corman and Paul Bartel were way ahead of the curve. Normally, this is the sort of thing you would think from an outsider coming in, like Verhoeven, to make fun of American culture and its bloodthirstiness. But here you have two red-blooded Americans doing that.
Yeah.
We should also probably take this point to kind of say that at this point, the movie does introduce us to another faction, the de facto kind of almost antagonists of this movie, which are the rebels. There is an underground movement to bring freedom back to America and overthrow the president. And they're very strange. They're these people who dress like they're in they're in some sort of weird factory or something. That's their hideout, I guess. But they're dressed like railroad workers from a Thomas and Friends kind of cartoon. And also their leader is this stuck-up old schoolmarm called Thomasina Paine, which, by the way, is a reference to Thomas Paine, one of the founding fathers of the Constitution. A guy who was so liberal back in the day that he died destitute because nobody liked his ideas. They even do the thing where they jam the TV signal to try to get their message out and say that they're trying to sabotage the race, which they call the transcontinental road rape. And so because of that, because the rebels have this plan to destroy the race, and then you find out later a plan to basically kidnap Frankenstein and replace him with a duplicate Frankenstein and hold Frankenstein hostage in exchange for abolishing the race, which you find out is actually a colossally stupid plan because, spoilers, Frankenstein is not one guy. He has been several different guys throughout the history of the race. They train them in a camp and basically genetically engineer them to beat Frankenstein. And David Carradine's Frankenstein is just the latest in a long line. And when he takes off his mask, or rather allows his navigator to take off his mask, you find out his face is just a regular guy. He's just regular sort of rugged David Carradine. There were no Swiss doctors, there were no stitches, nothing. The only thing that's real is that cyborg arm, which again, that's going to come up later.
Yep.
But yeah, so their plan is stupid because they don't know, and Frankenstein knows though, and but they keep trying to sabotage and or kill each of the different racers with these kind of Wile E. Coyote type traps. And literally one of them is, in fact, a Wile E. Coyote trap. Kevin, the Meet Roadrunner cartoon gag where Coyote will will paint an exact painting of a tunnel through a mountain and hope that the Roadrunner just runs into that painted wall and dies. But it turns out the Roadrunner goes right through it, but the Coyote doesn't. They literally do that in this movie.
I was hoping you were going to bring that up because I only realized that for the first time when I watched it. I was like, oh my God, this is like a fucking cartoon.
It is. They literally do a Looney Tunes cartoon gag.
With the bodies flying up into the sky, and with that whole sequence, and then of course the Matador sequence, I enjoyed this movie so much more because I saw the same thing you're referencing. I go, oh my God, this is a Looney Tunes cartoon. How did I never see this when I originally saw this movie?
But there's so many different layers of satire too, because there's also this kind of very cynical satirical comment on history and society when the rebels are talking about their plan, and they're having a really deep conversation about who really made Frankenstein. They're not sure why Frankenstein's disobeying and playing by his own rules. They're like, why did he miss those people? Was it Annie who persuaded him? Because the rebels can't fathom this idea that Frankenstein is his own free agent and can think for himself. They think surely our agent, because you find out that Annie is working with the rebels and is in fact the daughter of Thomasina Paine, and she's there on the inside trying to make sure that the plan to capture Frankenstein goes off that hitch. And they're like, "What's going on here?" So it must have been Annie. Of course, I was right. And then they start talking about how this race is like, it's like innocent people getting slaughtered on the highway, like Christians being thrown to the lions. And then the leader says, "But the Christians won that time," referencing the fall of the Roman Empire, which actually Christianity had very little to do with. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. That was more about the Visigoths and the political corruption. But anyway, but the guy says, she says, "But yeah, but the Christians won." And then the other guy, who's dressing up with a wide-brimmed hat for the next gag, basically, he says, "Did they?" And when he said, "Did they?" boy, oh boy, that was a hard bit of cynicism that kind of hit me in the face. Because, well, stick up your head and look around at the political landscape that we're in right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it also fits within the context of the movie. You have this world that is basically the Roman Empire all over again. And it seems like that great revolution really did nothing ultimately. At least it did temporarily. So, yeah, it's that kind of satire. You know, I used to have this definition of satire that worked for me. Maybe it still does. I don't know. But I used to have this definition where satire is comedy that you don't laugh at. You just go, huh. That's your reaction, you know? To me, yeah. And to me, sometimes I think, especially when I see like a movie that's marketed as a satire that was made overseas, like Triangle of Sadness is a great example. Triangle of Sadness is one of those satires that you look at and go, huh, yeah, huh. And that's it. Or The Menu, another good example.
The Menu?
They're not laugh out loud, slap your knee,
No.
funny, but that's what satire is to me. You know, social satire at its highest.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is to me. But thankfully, we have also some Looney Tunes kills sprinkled out to make us actually laugh really hard.
Yes. Those type of things bring in a tone that makes the film work. In any other regard, if they had taken the same situation and made it too serious, I don't think it would have worked. I think from the very beginning of our conversation, you mentioned the way that they present their satire makes the lunacy of the concept work. You have one of the 5 top drivers is a Nazi driver who the audience or some of the audience members absolutely root for. Like this is like it's working at a different level. Because I hate to say that, but I don't think you get away with that in today's climate. I don't think people would get the satire. I think it would be over their head.
No, they wouldn't. They would rip this movie apart on Twitter for sure.
Yeah. But when you're watching it under the context like I am now, this is an older movie and I'm watching it now and I'm like, holy shit, this is commenting on a lot of stuff that's relevant now. It was probably relevant back then too, because I think this was made in 76, 78. I can't remember anymore. 75. Yeah. 75. So this was before my time. We don't really talk too much about films that were before I was born. So I did not see it came out. So I don't have that reference point. So I don't know how those audiences in the 70s saw this film, because back then this was the future. This was representing a story that's in the year 2000. But now it's 2024 and we're looking back at it and shit, the damn movie still is relevant.
What's funny is like the short stories that Corman was adapting were written in the 50s.
Isn't that crazy?
And then this movie comes out in the 70s in the wake of Watergate and the Vietnam War, and President and John F. Kennedy being assassinated. But I think that was meant to be a comment on the political corruption and media's obsession with violence, which at the time was kind of nascent and on the rise. And boy, oh boy, they had no idea how far it could go.
Yeah.
Now we know. Boy, there was a missed opportunity with the Jason Statham death race. Although I will say that some of that satirical edge does come back in Death Race 2050, which we could talk about. It was a lot more closer to this movie than Statham's was, for sure. I also really enjoyed Manu Bennett as Frankenstein in that movie, just because I love Manu Bennett. I think he's a guy who should be used a lot more often. He's got a great voice and a great screen presence. I mean, there should be more action heroes who are from New Zealand doing their New Zealand accent. So I love him in that movie. So yeah, Death Race 2050 is worth seeing.
Okay,
but
cool.
But yeah, it also has Malcolm McDowell as the president in that movie. So that's got to see that. But so I alluded earlier to a scene that kind of might be the last remnant of the original story about this racer with a case of conscience, or has an encounter with a victim that may or may not change his worldview. And it comes right after the slightly risque massage parlor sequence that devolves into a cat fight between Calamity Jane and Matilda Dunn. There's a whole thing about that too, because all the racers except for David Carradine are on massage tables, butt naked, with the exception of Sylvester Stallone, whose butt is covered with a towel. There was a whole fight backstage apparently about the towel, because Stallone did not want his butt on screen. But all the women basically were like, "Come on," and we're all naked. You should be too. Even though Mary Warnoff has her hair basically covering her breasts, but nobody else. So apparently Corman laid down the towel, because his case to Paul Bartel was, let's just say the audience for this movie wants to see more breasts than Stallone's butt. So that was his thing. And that's the way they thought back then. But anyway, the next scene though is Frankenstein's on his way to his room, and he's intercepted by this young, barely 20s looking young girl who has a Frankenstein t-shirt on which just says letter F, because prop department, cheap movie, or costume department in this case. And she tells him, I'm your biggest fan. I'm the head of the fan club, and I just wanted to meet you and you to meet me, so it will mean something. And Frankenstein's like, what will mean something? And she won't say what it is. And then he asks him something that's kind of a underlying theme of this movie, is the idea of fame. And when people say they love a celebrity, what do they mean by that? And he asks her, why do you love me? What about me makes you love me? Is it because I kill? Is that it? And she's like, scoring isn't killing. It's just part of the race. And that line kind of shows you this thing that happens in totalitarian societies, where language is changed to gloss over something horrible. It allows the people who serve the totalitarian government to do horrible things.
They're decent.
We're not. Yes, we're not killing people. We are cleansing the mother. We're not. It's not a concentration camp. It's a work camp. And so it works in two ways in that scene, and her performance is so earnest, and his is just so kind of baffled that it leaves an impression on you. And I feel like his encounter with that lady kind of, the gears start turning a bit. I wonder how much, because we don't know at this point what Frankenstein's plan is. We don't find out till way later. So it almost kind of makes you wonder, like maybe like, is this part of a journey that Frankenstein is having where he's wondering about why I'm doing what I'm doing? How can I do what I do? Because basically you find out he's on a suicide mission. And then his cyborg hand, which has a big black glove that he never takes off, even when he's having sex with his navigator, is a bomb, basically. It's a grenade. It's a hand grenade. Ha, ha, ha. And he says, when I shake, only the winner gets to shake the president's hand. Mm-hmm. And this is the hand I'm going to shake him with. So the implication is he's going to blow himself up and the president.
Yep. A suicide.
Yeah, suicide bomber. And also, we find out in almost the very next scene that this girl, this pet of the fan club, is offering herself up to him to be killed on the highway by his car for points. I'm honestly surprised there wasn't much more of that in the movie, because the society that it portrays is so depraved that I would have imagined there would have been a lot more, like people, like almost like suicide club type. Like I can almost imagine a bunch of schoolgirls or college girls in uniforms just lined up, hoping that, you know, their favorite driver would just go down the line and mow them all down and get 100 points, you know, for collectively them. And it's a missed opportunity, but like you and that one girl, you get that psychology, that psycho fan devotion that ends up killing her. And weirdly, like, he gets it, but he doesn't, because when he mows her down, he doesn't avoid her. He kills her. Arguably, she is the only quote unquote innocent person that he kills in this movie.
You know, I didn't think about that.
Yeah. And Annie, I mean, everybody else he kills is part of the system. Everybody else he kills is part of this horrible system that he is the center of. But Annie asks him, like, what was that about? What was she doing? And he says, she was showing me how much she loves me.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of gives you shivers a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah. I don't know what else to say about that, but that's just that's stuck with me. I don't know why.
Well, that's the thing, is when I rewatched the movie, there's a lot of things that stuck with me more so this second time around than it ever did the first time around. Because I will admit that when I first saw this years ago, I just didn't get the movie. I simply thought this was a low budget racing movie where people killed other people to get points. I gave it no second thought. Watching it now in the political climate that we are in now, this is a movie that feeds an audience on violence, and they revel in it. Even by the end of the film, when the president is replaced by Frankenstein and his new bride, you don't think that there's going to be much of a change, because some of the rules that they're instituting is no better than the rules from the old regime, even though they're saying that they're going to get rid of certain things. They're going to abolish the intercontinental, I can't remember the actual name of the race anymore. Transcontinental road race. Jeez. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it, because it was such a thing. But the idea,
he's also saying he would abolish minority privilege or minority rule, basically. So
abolish minority privilege. Like, it's like, okay, so you fixed certain things, but you made certain things even worse. Wow. So you're not, one government is just as bad as the next government.
I mean, it's not. I mean, yeah, it's a little bit. Well, I think, now that I think about it, I don't think it's a question of he's worse than before. I mean, I think he's a little bit better. I mean, one thing he did say was like, I would like our capital to be moved back to New Los Angeles. No longer shall our government be governed from afar.
Yeah.
So, in the very least, the Frankenstein regime, which, by the way, he never has a name. He's just Frankenstein.
It's Frankenstein.
He's just Frankenstein. But
President Frankenstein.
President Frankenstein, yes. But he at least presents himself to the American people as a human, and not as like a semi-divine being who cannot be touched, like the original the previous president did.
Yeah.
They never really do answer the question of is President Frankenstein also president for life? Can he be voted out of office? Will there be free and democratic elections again? Question mark.
They did mention that. They did say that there were going to be elections again. He's bringing them back, but they did not mention whether or not Frankenstein was going to be president for a life, or if it was going to be part of those elections. So you don't really know. But he did put in charge the Thomas. What's her name?
Thomasina Paine. Yeah.
Yeah. They put and she was an extremist in the opposite direction. So she's in charge. So we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know what she's in charge of, basically, but we know she has a cabinet position, and I mean, mother-in-law now, so he's got to give her something. The thing is, I think what that's trying to say in its own way, and I think this is really profound if you think about it, that and coming off of like the revolutionary period of the 60s, this is kind of very I'm pretty sure I think I could say fairly confidently this is sort of the sort of thing that Paul Bartel was trying to get across, because I get the impression he was probably a little more cynical than the liberal idealist that Roger Corman was. I think what he was trying to say is basically that something that I kind of say all the time, which is that real and lasting change happens slowly.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say it again because I think it's important. Real and lasting, and I'll add the word positive, change happens slowly. You cannot expect radical political, legislative, social, moral, whatever change to sweep the nation overnight and expect it. And first of all, to not expect there to be backlash. Second of all, and to expect it to stick around without having instead the people swing the pendulum way back to the extreme opposite end of whatever it is you're doing, just as a reaction to what you did. So instead, you have to have slow change. I mean, case in point, the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement was a long time in coming. People think it happened overnight in the 60s. It didn't. It had a long gestation period. And let's face it, there's aspects of it that are still playing out. And they're still rooting out some of the systematic racism and stuff like that. You know, there's that old Dave Chappelle joke where he says, like, you know, he's telling the homosexual, the LGBT community, he's like, come on, guys, give it time, all right? I mean, just yesterday, somebody called me the N-word and threw a banana at my head, and that was today. These things take time. And he's right. These things take time. And I think by having Frankenstein basically be still a dictator, but he's a less horrible dictator than the one that they had before, is a step in the right direction.
Well, that all depends on if Frankenstein is still president in Death Race 2050.
I think Death Race 2050 is not meant to be a sequel. I think it's a reboot. I think it's a remake. Although, if you're super cynical, I guess you could say that it's a sequel in which none of that, a sequel in which none of his reforms stuck.
I still have to see it. I'll save my opinions after I see the movie, because now I'm gonna go look for it.
Yeah. I don't know. I think you can probably find it for pretty. Oh yeah, you can find it on Tubi. That's right. I was looking for it the other day, which is also where I found this movie again.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
I watched it.
Going back a little bit, because we kind of skipped way ahead and we skipped over some amazing action sequences. Because like at one point, there's this whole thing where the rebels don't know what Frankenstein's plan is, so they're trying to kill him after he escapes their switch out plan. And at one point, they try to kill him with a plane, and the plane is shooting at him from the sky. It's insane. It's great. It's great. But there's also the plot B of the rivalry between Stallone, Joe Vitero, or whatever his name is, and Frankenstein, and it comes to a head at several points. But they do have one fight scene that has nothing to do with their car. So I was thinking we could talk about that fight scene because it's interesting to me to see Stallone play not just an egotistical jerk, which apparently maybe he is a little bit in real life because of recent events, but also a murderous psycho. Like, I've never seen him play a real villain in a movie. Like, ladies and gents, this is Stallone as you've never seen him before. Mm-hmm. He really, like, up until this scene, he's just a lughead, basically. But when he threatens Annie and strangles her and says those cold, psychopathic words to her, that's like a whole other level of evil that I did not think he was capable of as an actor.
That's a good point. I don't think I've seen him as a villain in
ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the only time I've ever seen him play somebody who is just straight up bad and you just want to see him die. I mean, he strangles, and he's enjoying it. He's having like fun strangling the air out of her. But thankfully, Frankenstein comes in, saves her, and they have this comically stage kind of fight scene that's scored to like jazz. And my goodness, Stallone gets the crap beat out of him by David Carradine in his costume. He's all bloodied in his face. Not quite Rocky level bloody, but darn close. and yeah, it's and then like the climax of their fight is they're bashing each other's cars, and then all of a sudden Annie decides to give him a hand. And she throws the hand grenade, spoilers, into Joe's car and blows him up.
Yep.
So Annie gets her revenge on him. So that's something progressive.
Which is interesting because he takes no notice of the grenade. He is too busy doing his own thing, and it's his navigator that is trying to get him to stop. There's a fucking grenade in the car. And of course, it's too late, and they blow up because he's too arrogant and not paying any attention whatsoever. He really wants revenge on Frankenstein.
Yeah, and he never gets it because he has such tunnel vision.
Yep.
But yeah, that's kind of like the only thing that kind of the I guess the closest amalgamation of his character is Tyrese Gibson's character in the Jason Statham version, and they kind of carry over his disdain for his navigator. In that version, and the Tyrese version, I'll give them credit. They actually made that character even worse in that version because he keeps murdering his navigators by chucking them out of the car at high speed. Which the first time I watched this movie, I kept expecting him to do. He threatens to throw his gangster's mall navigator out of the car several times. Never does it. But yeah, I thoroughly expected him to do that. He does have this funny scene where this random dude who's fishing on the side of the road, and Stallone gets lost, and he's like, "Hey, what's the best way back on the highway from here?" And he's like, "Oh, right, you gotta turn around up there and get back on the bike." And he's like, "Oh, hey, I know you. You're Frankenstein, man. I love you." First of all, how he can possibly confuse those two characters, I have no idea. But anyway, this enrages him. And he's like, "You got about 2 minutes to live."
Yeah.
And he chases the poor Fisher guy down and just cuts him with his knife car. Which is what I'm going to call it from now on.
The knife car.
And because the guns don't work, they do nothing with the guns.
I didn't notice that until you mentioned it. I was like, I don't think they ever did go off.
No, they never did. And I had like a false memory of my first time watching it. I was like, I could have sworn he shot some people with those mounted guns, but nope, never does. I guess they're just decoration.
They couldn't afford that in the budget.
Well, it wasn't in the budget. We're just dumb. You got machine gun freaking, ugh, it's dumb that they never use it. But yeah, it's so funny how like Frankenstein performs his own switcheroo, and like you said, he kills the president, and he has this wonderful little scene where they're in the car, they're about to drive off on their honeymoon, and all the reporters are asking them those questions like, "Are you gonna abolish the race, Frankenstein? Really? You can't do that. It's our thing we look forward to. Sure the race is violent, but we love it that way." And it's the same guy with the kind of weird teeth, Junior.
Junior
getting annoyed, and like you said, I think there's a sense that things really aren't that different when Annie looks at him and goes, "Do we have to listen to this?" And he's like, says nothing, turns on the car and runs Junior over.
Yep.
And drives off into the sunset. There are many points of this movie, Kevin, where we could that are nice kill shot moments that could have had a quip to them. Some of them do, some of them don't. But I feel like this is the moment that, under normal circumstances, I would put the Schwarzenegger alternator in. But because this movie predates Schwarzenegger's rise to fame and is probably the only time in conversations in horror history where we have Sylvester Stallone in this movie, I feel it's incumbent upon us, and by us I mean me, to change things up a bit just this once.
Oh, you have to.
Instead imagine what it would be like if David Carradine and Sylvester Stallone had switched parts. And he and Stallone, more like the Stallone we know, had become the hero, become the Frankenstein, which, by the way, Stallone, I think he would make a good Frankenstein monster, by the way, because that face and that droopy lip and those heavy-lidded eyes, I could imagine that face being stitched together from dead bodies. I think that would have been a cool thing, and that's a missed opportunity. But let's do, for that scene, that last kill of the movie, that little FU to the media, let's put it through a thing I like to call the Stallone alternator, or the Stallone-inator.
Okay. Do I have a part in this one?
Yes, you do.
All right.
You do. I'd like you to play Annie and
okay.
and say, do we have to listen to this?
Okay.
I got 3. So the first, Stallone-inator.
All right. Tell me when you're ready.
I am.
Do we have to listen to this?
Nah. Turns on the car. Hey, Junior, you want blood? You got it. Runs him over. Then he looks back and goes, plenty of it, too.
Okay.
Number 2.
Do we have to do this?
Do we have to listen to this, you mean?
Oh, yeah, that's what it is. I'm sorry, I forgot. Do we have to listen to this?
No, baby. We don't got to listen to this. We can change the radio station. Here, let me change it for you. Here. You like rock and roll? Well, I like death metal.
I like that one.
Number 3.
Do we have to listen to this?
Nope. But we gotta listen to this. Turns on the car, rolls over Junior, and screams. And then as they're driving away, Stallone goes, by the way, there's this really awesome podcast you gotta listen to called Conversations in Horror.
Oh man, I really enjoyed. I can appreciate the third one. I really enjoyed the second one. Oh my god, I'm always looking forward to these. It's fucking hilarious. I can't believe you spend time thinking about these things.
Yeah, and honestly, I really do think this is probably the one and only Stallone-inator. I can't imagine any other Stallone. He's never done a horror movie. I don't think he's ever going to do a cult movie like this ever again.
Nah, his one horror movie I can think of, no one remembers at all.
I think I know what you're talking about. I See You.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or Detox. It was called Detox.
Yeah, Detox.
Yeah. Yes. You're right. Oh my gosh, you're right. That was like his one like serial killer, like straight to DVD horror movie-ish kind of thing he did. Yeah.
Oh my god. I don't remember anything about it. I've seen it. I remember nothing about that movie at all.
Well, maybe we should put it on the list to see if it is in fact as forgettable as you don't remember it to be.
Well, maybe in a year or so when we get desperate for some titles.
So, Kevin, I want to ask you something. Like I said, I mentioned before, Video Hound told me and kind of lied to me that this movie, Death Race 2000, had a sequel called Death Race 3000, which I assumed would be set in the year 3000, which I also assumed, they put Frankenstein on ice or clone him or something? But it turns out that movie doesn't exist because they changed the title and they changed almost everything else about it and turned it into a movie called Death Sport. But it also does star David Carradine, and it was released in, I think, 76 or 78. Yeah, 78. And it's basically the same thing, except Star Wars had come out, so instead of lightsabers, they have crystal swords that they fight with. And instead of cars they kill people with motorcycles.
Yeah, I just saw this movie.
Oh, okay.
I told you I was going through my Roger Corman movies, and I got a shit ton of movies from Shout Factory, Scream Factory, whichever you want to call it. That was a double feature. Out of 10 stars, I only gave it 4. So it must have been really bad because I don't remember it. I do remember seeing it because I just looked it up on the poster. I was like, oh yeah, I did see that. And I looked at it when I gave it 4 stars out of 10.
So you'd say it's middle of the road, as it were.
Oh my god. It had Richard Lynch in it. Holy shit.
Oh yeah, he's the Darth Vader. He's the bad guy.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I don't remember this at all, and I've only seen it. I only saw it within the last year, dude.
That's crazy. Apparently, I was looking it up on IMDb, and it looks like it's one of those movies that the making of this movie, the story of the making of this movie, is more interesting than the movie is, because it is one of those notoriously troubled productions, and like, many of the lead actors died under tragic circumstances. Most famous of which, like the female lead of this movie, I can't remember her name. She actually died in a car accident a year after this movie was released. And then, of course, we know much later on how David Carradine accidentally died, and somebody else had something terrible happen to them. Oh yeah, Alan Arkish made Caddyshack 2. That's what's terrible that happened to him. That was a travesty.
Roger Corman did go through and do some I guess some pickup shots or something. He's uncredited as the third director on this movie.
Oh yeah, that's part of like the whole thing. Is like this movie had like 3. Death Sport had like 2 or 3 directors, because the original director was a film school graduate, this kid who knew nothing and did nothing but fight with David Carradine. And apparently David Carradine was stoned the whole time, smoking copious amounts of marijuana. And then Alan Arkish came on and took over. And then I guess, like you said, Roger Corman himself was doing second unit on that just to get it finished. It was... Somebody needs to do a documentary about the making of this movie. But unfortunately, like I said, most of the people who are involved in making of it are now dead. So...
Yeah, you're right. It was originally developed as a Death Race 2000 follow-up. I did not know that.
Yeah, Death Race 3000. That's why I wanted to see it, and that's why I was curious about it. Like, the one thing that, like, this movie is... Death Race 2000 is a legitimately great movie. But for some people, for some modern audiences, I think will look at it they won't be able to get past the 70s cheese of it. They won't
Yeah.
be able to get goofiness of the cars, which we even talked about the fact that the cars didn't actually work on set. They barely worked. Most of the time, they're just rolling them down a hill or shooting them at really fast speed, so it makes it look like they're running really fast. They're not.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's like with 3000 though. It's like one of those things. Oh, sorry, I kind of got off track here, but like it's one of those things where 2000 is too well written and too well directed to be to be considered, so bad it's good.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if you're out there, ladies and gentlemen, you're looking for a Mad Max knockoff or something like that is so bad it's good, maybe skip this one and go right to Death Sport. I don't know.
No, I will think that I think you're right. I think because it's got Roger Corman's name behind it and it's a 70s movie, there's this automatic stigma that it's not going to be good. Because I hate to say this, a majority of a lot of the films that Roger Corman produced were not, in fact, good, as I just said about Death Sport. Of course, I could always go back and reevaluate that now again, like I did Death Race 2000, but I saw Death Race 2000 in the early 2000s, so there's a huge difference there now. But that being said, I think the audiences who are willing to take a second look at some of these films that Roger Corman produced back then, the talent that he brought up, that he allowed people to make these type of stories, and the stories that he wrote and developed himself, I think he actually put a little bit more into them than some of the films that he just randomly produced because it was a part of a fad. I don't know if this was part of any fad in 75, or if he started a fad around there. But this is definitely going to be one of my my top list of films from Roger Corman. And we've been watching a lot of them over the last couple months, and this one's one I'm glad I was able to reevaluate. So that's
so then, having said all that, what do we rate this movie, Kevin? I'm gonna pick an object.
Pick one.
You don't have to pick my object, but I feel like this object is the defining object of this movie. It's the MacGuffin of this movie. It is the Chekhov's gun, or Chekhov's grenade, if you will. I think the defining object of this movie, I'm going to pick the hand grenade.
The grenade. Same thing.
Oh, good. We're on the same wavelength. It's a sight gag, but it's a fun sight gag.
It's a hand with an authentic grenade in it. I was so laughing at that. I was like, half a grenade. Like, oh my god, a hand grenade, literally.
What's mind-boggling to me about that is like thinking about how it works. Like, I know the fingers bend because you see him manipulating them, and like, not to get vulgar here, but like during their almost sex scene midway through the movie. By the way, there's no actual sex in this movie. There's just a lot of nudity at certain points. But like, he's touching her chest with this glove that has a hand grenade in it. He's basically molesting her with an explosive device, which is interesting. But you see the way it's designed, the palm area has the actual grenade. It looks like a Vietnam freaking era grenade, pineapple shape, in the hand. How did she not feel that is what I'm wondering about. How does she not think, oh, this is weird. This feels weird, but I'm into it, I guess. How does, like, what? The second thing that makes me wonder is we never see, she does take off his hand, which is his gear shifting hand. She does take it off and then throw it in Joe's car, but like, she does some business on the palm. There's no, it's a grenade, guys. There's a pin in it somewhere. Where's the pin? We never see the pin get pulled, but somehow it works. I think it's a missed opportunity. I feel like the way the hand grenade should have worked is she should have pulled the middle finger out, just like completely, and that's the pin is the middle finger.
Oh wow!
Like, and then that's how it works. That would have worked. It would have been graphic. You could have seen it. It would have been funny, and yeah, that's what I would have done. But so, Kevin, you know what? Usually in our conversations, it's usually you who say that I convince you through our conversation to give it a higher rating than you normally might have. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. I was gonna rate this movie 3.5 hand grenades.
How many? Do we do 4 or 5?
5.
Okay.
So I was gonna do that, but now I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna do through our conversation. I think this movie does deserve 4 hand grenades out of 5.
I'm gonna actually agree with you on this one. Like I said, my outlook on this movie completely changed once I rewatched it, and I was like, I saw the humor in it, and I saw the commentary in it, and I thought it was spot on perfect. It may be dated because of what they were doing, obviously because it's a 70s movie. But that did not diminish the fact that it still has a great story and it's so much fucking fun. And if you can get behind that, you will enjoy this movie immensely. Think of it as a political satire done Looney Tunes, and you will fucking just be able to roll with this movie. This is now a movie I can just pop in and always enjoy, which I've never done before. I don't think there's any Raji. Well, Little Shop of Horrors I can do that with. I like watching his Little Shop of Horrors. I can just throw that movie in and always just have a laugh when I'm watching that movie. And maybe a Bucket of Blood. Maybe a Bucket of Blood. I'm a huge fan of that one as well. So I'm gonna give this 4 hand grenades because I thought that was another brilliant piece of prop that we had to do. And I would love to, if somebody on Etsy is listening to this, go out there and make a hand grenade prop like that in Death Race, and then just send it to me. I will buy it from you. Because I do that a lot on Etsy, is buy random stuff that people make based on film props. So, any any other words that you might have, Thomas?
When I watched this in preparation for this episode, it was like the day after or the day after the day after the 4th of July. And because, like you said, this movie starts with a Star Spangled Banner and a version of the American flag and the Nazi flag, unfortunately. I feel like this is a patriotic movie in a weird way. I feel like next year, ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking for something to put on your TV and there's no kids around, at least no kids under 18, and your 4th of July party, and you want to break from The Patriot or Jaws or Independence Day, I recommend put on Death Race 2000 for your 4th of July festivities next year.
I will say that I did see your little your social media post on that, your 3 movies for the 4th of July, and I was laughing because you didn't put something like Uncle Sam on there or anything else.
That's probably because I still haven't seen Uncle Sam all the way through. I've only seen pieces of it, and I didn't like the bits and pieces I saw, but I've heard it's good, so maybe I'll give it a shot next year.
It's not good. It's not one of. I think it's William Lustig who did that. I think it's one of his last. Yeah. It's not like his Maniac Cop. He tries his best to make it like that, and it's not. It's okay. I was thinking that you might put something like that on there, and when we do that conversation, because if you're listening to this, Uncle Sam is on our conversation to do at some point. Yeah. So, but that being said, I am glad we were able to delve deeper into Death Race 2000. I don't think I would have ever bothered to rewatch it again had you not suggested it. So I want to thank you for that. I hope that everyone out there is listening, who's listening to the podcast, actually takes the chance to rewatch Death Race 2000. I think it's a really great movie to watch any time of year, but it will be a little bit more fun during the 4th of July. I will not lie. But with that, check out all the other episodes we've done about Roger Corman. He is a amazing was an amazing filmmaker who produced a lot of great movies, a lot of cult movies out there, and we have only scratched the surface of those films. So even though our actual dedication to him will be coming to a close pretty soon, we hope that you will seek out all of his films, whether we've done a conversation on them or not. With that, I want to thank you all for joining us for Conversations in Horror. Please check out our sister podcast, Conversations in Horror Color, that is on our Patreon page for our supporters of that page only. And make sure to like, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your enemies about Conversations in Horror. Thank you so much and have a good day. Conversations in Horror is a Broken Lighthouse Pictures production, produced by Kevin L. Powers, executive produced by Kelly A. Inoka, and originally filmed via Zoom technology. Conversations in Horror is hosted by Kevin L. Powers and co-hosted by various horror film lovers and filmmakers. To learn more about Mr. Powers, please make sure to check out his Patreon page and other social media platforms. Conversations in Horror is copyright 2024 Broken Lighthouse Pictures production.